circulation? Are we trading both sides of a line? Are we actually advocating disparate, mutually exclusive things as if they can be commingled somehow, and this achieves the this is a means of achieving an object which has only been loosely cited as all these offenses against us, but none of which are assembled together in a singular expression, which prescribes such a thing as mathematically perfected economy does, in a solution of them. What is the expression for the solution? But solution, for instance, of the categoric faults that I give, you see, which in effect translate to resolving all of these other problems. But can you do this by, on the one hand, advocating spending money into circulation, which, as I have demonstrated, is inherently inflationary, and on the other hand, purportedly lending new money into circulation, when, as I have explained for years, in terms of explaining this obfuscation of a currency, you're not lending new money into circulation. New money doesn't exist. You're issuing a promissory obligation. And the whole problem here is we've allowed someone else to publish evidence of the promissory obligations and to falsify that into an artificial falsified debt to the purported banking system. That's the first crime. The second crime is that by imposing interest on that falsified debt, whereas in fact no lawful consideration was given up in the creation of new money. You understand that? The creation of new money is not to lend existent money. The creation of new money is engendered and executed by our issuance of our promissory obligations. And we've merely allowed these purported central banking systems to obfuscate that into this falsified debt, which they multiply then into terminal debt by imposing interest on the principal as if the principal were their property, which it never was. They've just created evidence of our promissory obligation, which is an obligation to each other to pay and retire principal at the rate of consumption or depreciation of the related property. Simple as that. So this is preposterous to say that a purpose is to enable the federal government to invest or lend new money into circulation. You see, if you're advocating spending money into circulation, why are you advocating this on the other hand? You see, and neither proposition do you qualify, because in fact you're not lending new money into circulation. It's a physical and legal impossibility. The creation of new money always transpires over our issuance of a promissory obligation, even in the case of federal government. Because what's happening in the case of federal government, which acts on behalf of the people to create public infrastructures and so on and so forth, the people assume the obligation to pay for that infrastructure, whatever it is, or service or whatever it is, to pay for it as they consume of it. That's the only just taxation. It's the only thing that maintains the integrity of our promissory obligations. But it's just the same then in public affairs as it is in private enterprise. On page 14, line 7, we find another preposterous thing here. Coordinating with other law is the title of section 4, and this is item B under that. Technical and conforming amendments. Listen to this. Before the end of the 6-month period beginning on the date of the enactment of this bill, before the end of 6 months, in other words, the Secretary of the Treasury of all people, whatever his background is, We have no idea, how he would be prepared to fulfill this. Why he should have the authority to do so is not declared. But obviously, this is an incredibly amiss proposition. But anyway, the Secretary of the Treasury shall submit to Congress, in other words, within 6 months, a proposed draft. Oh, and then how long do we have to enact on it? Enact it and enforce it and implement it and all. A proposed draft of legislation of the monetary authority that, if enacted, would implement such technical and conforming amendments as the monetary authority may recommend. 1. To repeal the provisions of law referred to in subsection A that are inconsistent with this act, and 2. To further clarify and implement the provisions of this act. Whoa! Wait a minute. Excuse me. If you are proposing solution of all these things, why isn't it that it isn't incumbent upon you, the author of this bill, to specify that right here and now? I mean, why are you leaving this gaping hole in this proposed act, which leaves leeway for whoever to do what by whatever principles, which principles you haven't even declared yourself, much less proven, much less demonstrated are the principles that we should share, because we don't even know what they are. You have conflicting propositions. You're spending money into circulation. You're claiming you can lend new money into circulation. Lend something that didn't even exist into circulation. You see, which is our problem, that we do not resolve our perception of each and every issue to exactly what that thing is. You see, you don't borrow money from banks which never existed before. They publish it. And how do they publish it? They publish it whenever we ourselves issue our promissory obligation, which rightfully is a promissory obligation to retire principal at the rate of consumption or depreciation of the related property. Period. You see, so here we have, a pretentious specification of technical and conforming amendments without any technicality whatsoever. There isn't a principle that's even declared to abide by. You see, and you have conflicting prescriptions throughout the act. I mean, this is preposterous work. On line 1 of page 15, for instance, he just goes on with this. This is unbelievable. If you sit down and study this and fathom how it all is to relate to different parts of itself, even, this is just preposterous stuff. He goes on to say, under Title 1, or origination of United States money. Line 1 of page 15, item 1 under item A. The authority to create money within the United States shall hereafter reside exclusively with the federal government. Now, how would any of us monetize private industry, which is the whole foundation for even funding government, paying for it? What are we going to do? Spend everything into circulation and just pay for it somehow, which doesn't relate to our consumption or rightful obligation to pay for what we consume? I mean, this is preposterous. You would be denying, if you're claiming that the only authority to create money resides in the federal government, then you're denying the individual even the right, theoretically, to contract, which is the same thing as to promise to pay, to deliver at a future time something of value. I mean, if the only reason for a contract to exist is such an arrangement, because if the trade can exist now, the trade is simply performed. So a contract is always in effect a promissory obligation as well. So You're denying the right of individuals to issue their own promissory obligations, which is the only reasonable vehicle for monetizing our production. You see, this is the opposite of what we should do. Truly, we might, as I have proposed for so long, create a common monetary foundry which certifies the creditworthiness of individuals and collections of individuals and enforces payment. But in fact, what are we doing there? We're not issuing the money as federal government. We're merely issuing it in a common form on behalf of the individual or individuals. Likewise, when the federal government funds a project, the federal government issues a promissory obligation agreed to by the people who are going to pay for it. You see, this is the only rightful and veritable means of monetizing anything and everything, even government infrastructures. When we monetize them, we are monetizing our production because we are creating something, you see. And always, 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 the rightful payer is the person that consumes of it. So what you have here is a total lack of understanding of the underlying principles and a mistake which would prevent us from ever abiding by the only principles which can serve us. I repeat, it states, item 1, line 1, page 15, the authority to create money within the United States shall hereafter reside exclusively with the federal government. That's what's wrong. It is we, the people, who monetize our production, who are ultimately the issuers of all money, even today, under the present obfuscation of the currency. What's wrong here is we've allowed another party to presume it's a debt to them, to falsify a debt to them, when in fact they give up nothing. The true creditor is the person or persons who provide the property for which we give up the promissory obligation, which obligation therefore is to pay and retire principal out of circulation. Paid principal is the property of no one. No one is the rightful owner of paid principal in regard to a promissory obligation. So this whole idea that the federal government would be lending new money into circulation is wrong. And likewise, this provision, which outlaws the private individual's right to issue currency, is likewise wrong. You see, this prevents us from achieving the only things which can serve us, which is to restore the right of the individual to issue their own promissory obligations free of extrinsic manipulation, adulteration, exploitation, or even obstruction of the very opportunity to make good on the obligation. Those are the problems engendered by the present obfuscation of the currency. But the rightful authority to create money remains with the individual. It is not a right of federal government. Nor can the federal government provide any service by taking that over from us. So he goes on in such a trivial manner. The next point, he says, the money so created shall be known as United States money, and denominated, instead of the proper grammar, and shall be denominated, and shall be expressed, it should say, as provided in section 5101 of Title 31 United States Code. Baloney, 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 baloney. So it even gets worse on the same page. Line 14, item 1, under item C. Only the coin, notes, or other forms of legal tender, including electronic currency, originated by the United States Treasury under the